Deep in the quiet archives, a young woman named Elara made a choice that would unravel history itself. With ink-stained fingers, she reached for a forgotten runestone, convinced its carvings held more than just old stories. Her belief in the myths of the first storytellers was about to challenge everything scholars thought they knew. By translating this stone, she risked her reputation and the very stability of recorded history. Her journey will reveal a lost realm where every story ever told is woven into reality. By the end, you will understand how a single act of curiosity can mend the fabric of our collective imagination. What ancient truths lie hidden in the stories we have forgotten? I would love to know where you are joining this tale from today and what the local time is for you right now. What memory from your own life feels like it holds a story waiting to be told? The rune's amber glow pulsed under Elara's fingertips, humming a melody so ancient it felt like a memory. Her hand moved almost on its own, tracing the lullaby's path across a star chart of the void. As the last note faded from her mind, the map shimmered. Ink lines swirled into a new pattern, coalescing into a constellation no scholar had ever recorded. A wave of warmth radiated from the runestone, washing through the silent library. Dormant tapestries lining the high walls stirred, their woven threads lifting in a gentle, impossible breeze. That was when the heavy oak door creaked open. Archivist Kale stood silhouetted against the torchlight, his expression carved from disapproval. He saw the glowing rune, the shifted star chart, and the defiance in Elara's eyes. His voice was a low chill in the suddenly still air. "You are tampering with forces the Academy has deemed forbidden," he stated, his words echoing old dogma. "These are not stories for children. They are locked away for a reason." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice held steady. "It is not a lock," she replied. "It is a door, and it is calling." Kale's warning was stark and simple. "Continue this path, and you forfeit your place here. The archives are all you have." But as he turned, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, Elara knew that was no longer true. She had seen the new stars. She carefully gathered the runestone and the transformed map, her decision made. As she tucked them into her leather satchel, she noticed a faint, golden light seeping through the worn fabric. The stone's warmth had not faded. It was a silent, persistent promise, glowing softly against the encroaching dark. The golden light from her satchel pulsed like a quiet heartbeat as Elara stepped from the cobblestone streets into the shadow of the weeping willow lane. It was a place the city seemed to have forgotten, where the cottages were nestled between twisting roots and overhanging boughs. At the very end stood the home of Old Man Hemlock, a structure that looked less built and more grown, its walls a living tapestry of willow branches woven tight. The air smelled of damp earth, old paper, and dried lavender. The door, a simple arch of woven twigs, was already open. Inside, the light was green and soft, filtering through the canopy. Hemlock was waiting, his hands busy repairing the spine of a colossal, crumbling atlas. He did not look up as she entered, but his voice, like the rustle of autumn leaves, filled the space. "I felt the old stories stir when you woke the runestone," he said. "They have been silent for a long time." He finally lifted his gaze, and his eyes held the profound patience of deep, still water. He was not just a bookbinder. He was the last keeper of forgotten tales, the final descendant in a long line of oral historians who remembered the world not in dates, but in narratives. He set his tools aside and gently took a worn, leather-bound journal from a high shelf. "You read stories, child," he explained, "but you have not yet learned to listen." He placed Elara's hands upon the journal's cover and asked her to close her eyes. At first, she felt only cool, cracked leather. Then, a faint vibration, a resonance of the hands that had held it, the tears that had fallen upon its pages, the whispered hopes confided to its lines. The story was not just in the words, it was in the very fiber of its being, a lingering echo of the life it had witnessed. "This is how you hear them," Hemlock murmured. "All objects hold their histories if you are quiet enough to listen." From a small wooden chest, he brought out a curious device. It was a compass, but its face was blank, and its needle was forged from a dark, smoky crystal. "This does not seek the North Pole," he said, placing it in her palm. "It seeks the pull of narrative truth. It will guide you toward places and objects thrumming with significance, where a great story was born, or where a profound truth rests." As her fingers closed around the brass case, the needle gave a faint shudder, as if waking from a long sleep. His tone grew solemn then. "The realm you seek is real," he confirmed. "But it is not an empty kingdom. It is tended by the weavers, the first children of the original storytellers. They have guarded its gates for eons. They may see your intrusion not as a pilgrimage, but as a violation. The fear they might reject you, that they could seal the realm forever to protect it, is a very real danger. You are an outsider, and their trust is not lightly given." Elara looked from the compass in her hand to the old man's frail form. She saw the weight of his legacy, the countless stories he was the last to remember. Accepting this tool meant accepting the responsibility that came with it. Her choice was clear. "I will find the entrance," she said, her voice steady with a resolve that surprised her. She was no longer just a scholar chasing a theory. She was a seeker, and this was her path. Hemlock nodded, a slow, weary gesture that carried the gravity of a final blessing. "Then know this," he whispered. "That compass is a beacon not just for stories, but for those who crave their power. There are those who would hoard such knowledge for control, or destroy it out of fear. You carry a target on your back now, and I," he added, his voice softening with a quiet finality, "cannot follow where you must go." His mentorship, a flame she had only just found, was already guttering. As she stepped back across the threshold of the willow cottage, the crystal needle in the compass spun wildly. It steadied itself, pointing unerringly toward the dark line of trees on the horizon known as the Whispering Woods. A low hum seemed to emanate from the forest, a vibration she felt in her bones. The very air there was thick with the scent of pine and possibility, charged with the breath of a million untold stories. The Whispering Woods did not simply stand before Elara, they breathed. The air was thick with the scent of wet bark and old secrets, and the trees seemed to lean in as she crossed the threshold. The forest floor was a mosaic of moss and shadow, and the path behind her dissolved into a wall of thorny undergrowth the moment she took her first step forward. There was no going back. She opened her palm, and the compass needle, forged of smoky crystal, spun in a frantic circle before pointing decisively to the left. She followed, her steps quiet on the soft earth, but the woods were alive with more than just sound. A low hum vibrated through the soles of her boots, a resonant frequency that seemed to listen. When she hesitated at a fork in the trail, the trees themselves groaned and shifted, their roots twisting like great serpents to block the wrong way, their branches weaving together to gently suggest another. The forest was not a static place. It was a responsive, sentient maze that judged her every choice. It tested her with more than shifting geography. As she walked, whispers began to coil around her, not from any visible source, but from the air itself. They did not speak in words so much as in feelings, echoing her own deepest fears. "You are just a scholar," they seemed to sigh, "an archivist who has lost her way." The first storytellers have no need for you. Illusions flickered at the edge of her vision. She saw a phantom image of herself, older and broken, stumbling out of the woods empty-handed, a failure. The sight was a cold knot in her stomach. For a moment, the compass felt heavy and useless in her hand, its guidance a lie. She wanted to shout back, to argue with the disembodied mockery, but the memory of Old Man Hemlock's voice surfaced instead. "You have not yet learned to listen," so she stopped fighting. She took a deep breath and did not answer the taunts with anger. Instead, she spoke to the forest with the same kindness she would offer a frightened child. "I am listening," she said softly. "I am here to learn." She remembered the folktale Hemlock had mentioned in his cottage, a fleeting story about a fox woven from starlight who had lost its way in a mortal forest. The tale was fragmented in her mind, but she began to recite the pieces she knew. Her voice was low and steady. The fox was clever, but the woods were dark, and it could not find the path home by sight alone. So it listened. It listened to the rhythm of the crickets and the whisper of the wind through the pines, and as she spoke, something shifted. The mocking whispers quieted. The trees seemed to still their restless shifting. She continued, her words painting the fox's perseverance, its refusal to succumb to despair. It trusted that the story of the world would guide it, and so it did. A final shimmering thread of starlight appeared, showing the way. As the last word left her lips, the oppressive weight in the air lifted. The gnarled roots barring her path sank back into the earth, and a new trail, carpeted with soft clover and glowing mushrooms, unveiled itself before her. The forest had not wanted a command. It had wanted a conversation. It demanded respect and reciprocity, a shared understanding that myth is a living thing. Each misstep had cost her. A profound weariness tugged at her limbs, as if the forest had been feeding on her uncertainty. She understood now that this was not a test of her scholarly skill, but of her character. Disrespect here was not met with simple resistance. It could lead to a permanent, leafy prison, her own story absorbed and forgotten within the endless, shifting maze. But she had passed the first trial. The new path led her onward, the compass now humming a contented, single note. The oppressive gloom of the deep woods gradually gave way to dappled sunlight. The path opened into a small, perfectly serene glade. In the center, nestled between two ancient, silver-barked trees, stood a stone archway. It was old beyond reckoning, its surface covered in a blanket of ivy that glowed with a soft, internal light. The space within the arch shimmered, not with a reflection, but with a deep, swirling potential, like a pool of liquid night sky, waiting for a story to give it shape. The stone archway waited, its ancient stones humming with a patient, silent energy. Elara stepped forward, the compass now still and warm in her hand. This was the moment of truth. To open the way, she could not simply repeat an old story. She had to create a new one, weaving together the threads of myth she had gathered from the runestone, from Hemlock's teachings, from the very whispers of the woods. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath, and began to speak. Her voice started softly, painting a picture of a lonely mountain carved from a single fallen star. Upon its peak lived a creature of woven light, a guardian who had forgotten its own name, its purpose eroded by the endless wind. This guardian was a thread pulled from the tail of the starlight fox, reshaped into a new form of solitude. As she spoke of the guardian's sorrow, a shiver ran through the ivy, clinging to the arch. The leaves began to stir, their soft glow brightening. She wove in another thread, the memory of the weeping willow lane's enduring patience. She gave her guardian a quest, not for glory, but for understanding. It would descend the star mountain to find the source of a melody that haunted its dreams, a song only heard when the world held its breath. Her words gained strength, painting its journey through vales of singing crystal and forests of silver-leaf trees that told truths with every rustle. The air in the glade began to change, thickening with the scent of ancient paper and the sharp, clean smell of a coming storm. The space within the archway shimmered, then swirled with cascading colors, a living aurora of potential waiting to be born. The gateway was waking, but so was something else. A violent tremor shook the ground, rattling the stones beneath her feet. From the dark edges of the woods, shadows began to peel themselves from the trunks of trees. They were formless, shifting voids, with no features but a deep, chilling hunger. The forgetters. They flowed toward the glade, drawn to the brilliant energy of the unfolding story, like moths to a flame. Their presence was a sudden, biting cold, and with it came a wave of numbness, a threat to erase the very narrative she was creating. Elara's heart leaped into her throat. She had to finish. She had to believe. She quickened her tale, her voice rising above the groaning earth. She described the guardian, finding the source of the melody, a hidden spring, where the first stories of the world were said to have been whispered into the waters. As the guardian drank, it remembered its name, its purpose, and its light blazed forth, not to dominate, but to illuminate. She poured every ounce of her conviction into those final words, her belief in the power of story becoming the final, crucial thread. The portal roared to life, the auroral light within the arch solidifying into a shimmering, tangible surface. The forgetters were almost upon her, their chilling silence more terrifying than any sound. To hesitate was to fail. The gateway's light would be consumed, the path to the realm lost forever, and she would be left in a void stripped of all memory and meaning. There was no more time for thought. With the shadows reaching for her, Elara took one last look at the world she knew, and then she leaped. She plunged into the swirling heart of the light. The solid ground vanished, and for a moment there was only a deafening roar and a sensation of falling. Then the world dissolved into a breathtaking, overwhelming kaleidoscope. She tumbled through visions of creation, myths, and forgotten fables, through the echoes of epic battles and quiet lullabies, all woven together in a river of living narrative. She was rushing headlong toward the source, the loom where every story ever told was being woven anew. The kaleidoscope of narrative dissolved into a soft, ambient light as Elara's feet met solid ground. She found herself standing in a library-meadow, an impossible landscape where the sky was a vaulted ceiling of woven constellations, and the grass underfoot hummed with a quiet, knowing energy. Rivers of liquid starlight flowed in gentle curves, their banks lined not with stone, but with shelves of living, breathing books. Above her, the air shimmered with floating tapestries, each one a living scene from a different time. She saw epic battles fought in silent pantomime, quiet moments of love and loss, and the simple, profound discoveries of everyday life, all woven from threads of colored light that shifted and changed as the stories themselves evolved. Before she could even process the wonder, a figure glided toward her. It was a being composed of intertwined strands of light and what looked like spun silver, its form both solid and ethereal. A weaver, its face was serene, impossible to read, and it extended a hand that was more a collection of shimmering filaments than flesh. Without a word, it gestured to a nearby tapestry, depicting a simple campfire under a vast starry sky. Understanding the silent request, Elara reached out and touched the woven scene. The moment her fingers made contact, the tapestry flared with a warm, golden light. The image of the campfire enveloped her, and she was no longer an observer. She felt the crackle of the fire, smelled the wood smoke, and saw, sitting across the flames, a figure whose face was indistinct, but whose presence radiated a profound, foundational calm. This was the first storyteller. No words were spoken, but a concept was imparted directly into her mind, a single, powerful truth. A story is not a possession. It is a shared breath, a gift meant to be passed from hand to hand, growing with each telling. The vision faded, leaving Elara back in the meadow, her heart aching with a beautiful, terrible understanding. The weaver's voice was like the soft chime of distant bells, resonating in her thoughts rather than her ears. You feel the truth, it observed, but you must also understand the fragility. Fewer now listen with their hearts. They collect facts, but they do not hear the breath between the words. The realm frays because the stories are being forgotten, not from memory, but from significance. Your presence here is a tremor on the loom. You could help mend the unraveling threads, or your disbelief could pull at the weak points and hasten the end of it all. The stakes were no longer about her reputation or a single forgotten myth. The decay of this realm meant the slow fading of humanity's oldest dreams, the foundational myths that taught courage, kindness, and wonder. If these narratives were lost, the very fabric of human imagination would grow thin and gray. Elara did not hesitate. She met the weaver's luminous gaze, her voice clear and certain. "I am an archivist," she said. "My life has been spent preserving fragments. Let me use that skill not for a dusty shelf, but for this living world. I believe in the power of your stories. I offer you my hands and my faith." The weaver studied her for a long, silent moment, the threads of its form shifting as if weighing the sincerity woven into her very soul. Then it gave a slow, graceful nod. "Come then," it chimed. "See the source of the unraveling and the work that must be done." It turned and led her toward the heart of the meadow, where a colossal structure stood. The loom of beginnings was a vast, complex framework of golden light, where new stories were meant to be woven, from the raw starlight of the rivers, but its beauty was marred. Many of the luminous threads were tangled into hopeless knots, and others were fading, their vibrant colors leaching away into a dull, lifeless gray, threatening to snap at any moment. The loom of beginnings hummed with a sound like a distant, sorrowful choir. The weaver guided Elara's gaze to a specific tapestry, one depicting the first sunrise. Its threads were not broken, but faded, as if the memory of that initial, glorious light was slowly dimming in the collective mind of the world. The weaver's chiming voice was heavy. This story is the foundation of hope in countless others. If it goes dark, the concept of a new day loses its power. We must gather the scattered light. Elara watched as the weaver's filament-like hands moved with impossible grace, plucking shimmering threads of gold and amber from the very air, each one a fragment of the original narrative. The weaver showed her how to listen for their resonance, to find the ones that harmonized with the core of the sunrise tale. Then it was her turn. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and gathered a handful of the warm, pulsing light threads. She remembered the words Old Man Hemlock had taught her, a creation chant from a language so old it predated writing. She spoke them softly, her voice a steady rhythm against the loom's melancholic hum. As she spoke the final syllable, she guided the threads into the tapestry's waiting pattern. The effect was instantaneous. The faded tapestry blazed with the brilliance of a true dawn. A wave of palpable warmth and clarity radiated outward, washing through the library-meadow. Nearby, a tapestry showing a hero finding courage glowed more brightly. Another depicting a simple act of kindness pulsed with renewed strength. For a glorious moment, the entire realm felt more solid, more real, but that surge of narrative energy was a beacon in the silence. From the shadowy edges of the meadow, patches of nothingness began to seep inward. The forgetters, they moved as zones of absolute quiet and visual static, their presence causing the vibrant colors of the stories to dull and the harmonious sounds to falter. They were drawn to the repaired sunrise story, their chilling numbness reaching for its brilliant threads, threatening to undo the work. Elara did not wait for instruction. She saw a needle of solidified starlight resting near the loom, its form cool and sharp. She made her choice in a heartbeat. She was not here just to observe or assist. She was here to fight. Her hand closed around the needle's hilt, and a jolt of purpose, cold and clear, ran up her arm. She was no longer a visitor. She was a participant, a guardian in training. The stakes were now terrifyingly personal. Each story the forgetters consumed did not just vanish. It weakened the structural integrity of the realm itself. The very ground beneath her feet felt less certain after a smaller tale of a lost child finding its way was erased into static, and her direct involvement, her use of the starlight needle, made her a shining target. The forgetters began to shift their focus from the tapestries to her. She felt a new kind of cold, one that threatened not just the stories around her, but the stories within her. As she finished weaving a simple, reinforcing pattern into a nearby narrative, a flicker of movement caught her eye. On a smaller, more intimately familiar tapestry, she saw her own face. It was the story of her life, and it was beginning to flicker, its colors wavering as if the memory of her own childhood was being questioned. The forgetters had found their most potent weapon. They were not just attacking the realm, they were coming for her. The sight of her own story, flickering on the tapestry, sent a cold jolt through Elara's veins. It was not just a memory under threat. The Forgetters were seeking a deeper, more foundational target. Through the shimmering threads, she perceived their true objective. They were hunting for the anchor myth, the primordial story that first wove the human world and the realm into a single, shared existence. If that narrative was erased, the connection would snap. The gateway would seal forever, and the realm, along with every story it held, would dissolve into silent, formless static. The weavers confirmed her fear with a single, chiming note of sorrow. The last known echo of that myth rested in the echoing caves, a place where the world's oldest stories had seeped into the stone and crystallized. Her path was clear and desperate. She had to find it before the void of the Forgetters consumed it completely. The entrance to the caves was a fissure in a hillside that seemed to breathe, exhaling air that carried the faint, layered whispers of 1,000 different tongues. Inside, the walls were not simple rock. They were vast, intricate formations of crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal light. Each formation resonated with a specific foundational tale. One glowed with the steady rhythm of a creation story. Another hummed with the chaotic energy of a flood myth. She walked through a forest of frozen narratives, her every footstep causing the crystals to chime in recognition. But how could she find the one story she needed? The memory of the runestone's lullaby surfaced in her mind, the same melody that had first awakened the star chart. Taking a steadying breath, she began to hum the ancient tune. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. The central crystal cluster before her, a formation of deep amethyst and clear quartz, flared with a brilliant, blinding light. Beams of colored radiance shot from its facets, weaving together in the air to form a three-dimensional play of light and shadow. This was the anchor myth. It showed not gods or monsters, but a simple, profound moment. A solitary figure, the first human to truly listen to the wind, heard a story in its sigh. In return, that human offered a story of their own, a tale of loss and hope whispered back into the silence. That reciprocal act, that first exchange of narrative, created the first thread that bound the two worlds together. It was a covenant of shared imagination, but the cave itself was a fragile vessel for such power. The vibrations of the unfolding myth sent tremors through the cavern. With a sharp crack, a massive crystal shard broke free from the ceiling, plummeting toward the holographic display. Elara threw herself to the side, the shard shattering on the ground where she had just stood. The entire chamber groaned, dust and smaller crystals raining down around her. She had to absorb every detail of the myth while dodging the collapsing geography, her mind racing to memorize the sequence of images, the emotional resonance of that first fragile bond. She knew then that this story could not be written on paper, a medium too easily lost or destroyed. Her hand went to the small, cool locket Old Man Hemlock had pressed into her palm as she left his cottage. It was meant for guarding small, precious things. She opened it, revealing an interior that was not metal, but a smooth, dark surface that seemed to drink the light. From her satchel, she retrieved the starlight needle. It had served as a weapon, but now it revealed its second purpose. As she held its point over the locket's dark interior, the tip glowed, becoming a pen of pure light. While the cave trembled and crystals fell around her, she focused all her will, using the light pen to inscribe the anchor myth, not as words, but as a direct pattern of resonant energy onto the locket's core. Some truths were too precious to be left unguarded. They needed a keeper. The moment the final symbol was etched, the locket snapped shut, glowing with a warm, steady light against her chest. The holographic projection in the cave flickered and died, its energy now safely contained. As if in response, a path of soft, glowing moss ignited along the cave floor, illuminating a previously hidden exit. The way forward was clear, leading her out of the unstable caves and toward the next trial, a place the weavers had named only in whispers, the Grove of Voices. The Grove of Voices was a sanctuary of sound. Elara stepped from the cave's echoing silence into a clearing where the air itself seemed to vibrate with a soft, polyphonic hum. The trees here were not wood and bark, but living pillars of opalescent light, their branches swaying to a rhythm only they could feel. These were the spirits of the first storytellers, and their stories were not spoken, but sung, a continuous, layered chorus that was the very heartbeat of the realm. A profound peace settled over her, a feeling of being heard and held by the collective memory of countless voices. But that peace was fragile. At the very edge of the grove, the vibrant colors and harmonious sounds met an absolute wall of stillness. The forgetters had gathered, a silent, patient army of static, their presence casting a pall that slowly leached the warmth from the air. They could not cross the grove's boundary, but their oppressive silence was a siege, and with every passing moment, the protective glow of the singing trees dimmed just a little more. Time was a resource she could almost see draining away. One of the spirit trees, its form shimmering with a particularly deep, resonant light, bent a branch toward her. The request was not spoken, but understood. To earn their trust, to be worthy of their legacy, she could not only receive, she had to give. She had to add her own voice to their eternal song. Closing her eyes, Elara reached for a story that felt true, a narrative woven from the very fiber of her own journey. She began to speak of a librarian, not in a grand archive, but in a small, forgotten town where the stories in books had grown dusty and silent. This librarian did not perform great feats of magic. Instead, she mended the world with small, consistent acts of kindness. She listened to the lonely, she shared tales of hope with the weary, and she reminded everyone who would listen that every person carries a story worth telling. As Elara gave voice to this simple narrative, something miraculous happened. The opalescent trees responded. Their gentle humming swelled into a chorus of approval, and across their luminous branches, flowers of pure, bioluminescent light began to bloom, painting the grove in shifting hues of sapphire and emerald. Her story, born from her own experience, had become a part of theirs. As the last word faded, the central spirit tree extended a single, glowing leaf toward her. It floated down and landed softly in her palm, cool and smooth as polished glass. The moment her skin touched it, she understood its purpose. This was a memory leaf, a vessel that could capture not just words, but the essence of a story, the emotion, the resonance, the very soul of a narrative. Looking from the leaf to the besieged grove, a new, urgent purpose crystallized within her. Preserving one anchor myth was not enough. These primordial voices, the foundational stories of courage, loss, and love, needed a sanctuary. She would not just carry a single story home. She would use this gift to create a story vault in her own world, a living archive where these narratives could be kept safe and shared, ensuring they would never be silenced. She held the leaf aloft, and it began to glow brighter. One by one, the spirit trees directed their song toward it. She felt their histories flowing into the leaf, the first laugh, the first tear, the first promise ever made. Each story became a permanent, shimmering pattern within the glassy surface. But with each story recorded, the grove itself grew a little quieter, a little more transparent. This was a final gift, a passing of the torch. The grove's power was fading, and this might be the last time these stories were told in this sacred place. Losing them would be more than a loss of history. It would be a severing from the roots of human wonder itself, as the final narrative was secured within the leaf, now glowing with the soft light of a captured galaxy. The central spirit tree gave a final chiming note. It pointed a luminous branch toward the distant horizon, where a single needle-like spire pierced the kaleidoscopic sky. That is the weaver's spire, the thought echoed in her mind, where all threads of narrative converge. But hurry, seeker, a great unraveling has already begun. The weaver's spire pierced the sky like a needle of frozen light. Elara climbed its crystalline steps, each one humming with the strain of 1,000 fraying narratives. Inside the central chamber, the air was a storm of chaos. The head weaver, a being of immense, complex light, stood at the heart of the maelstrom, her filament hands a blur as she tried to catch snapping threads of gold and silver. Stories of love, of bravery, of simple kindness were unraveling before her eyes, their colors fading into gray static. The forgetters were here, their formless presence a chilling void that sapped the clarity from the very air, causing the lesser weavers to falter and lose their way, their luminous forms flickering with confusion. In that moment of crisis, Elara's hand closed around the locket at her chest. She opened it, and the anchor myth she had safeguarded blazed forth, not as a simple light, but as a resonant frequency of that first sacred bond. The projection filled the chamber, a steady, rhythmic pulse of shared breath and whispered promise. The frantic snapping of threads slowed. The head weaver, her form stabilizing, seized the moment, her hands moving with renewed purpose to realign the primary mechanisms of the great loom. The room held its breath, but the reprieve was temporary. The static was already thickening again, a tide of silence pushing back against the light. "We cannot merely mend what is broken," Elara said, her voice cutting through the dissonance. "We must build something new, a story woven from the strongest threads of every culture, a narrative about narratives themselves, a story of stories that reminds all who hear it why these tales matter. It is the only way to reinforce the foundation." The head weaver turned, her luminous gaze holding Elara's. The risk was beyond calculation, to weave such a meta-narrative at the loom's very core. If its structure faltered, if a single thread of its meaning was flawed, the failure would not be isolated. It would cascade through every connected tale, unraveling millennia of myth in a single, catastrophic instant. But to do nothing was to accept a slow, silent death for both their worlds. The weaver gave a single, solemn chime of assent. Together, they began gathering the most resilient threads. A golden strand from an epic of perseverance, a silver one from a fable of compassion, a copper wire humming with the joy of discovery. But as they worked, the disparate forgetters lurking in the spire's shadows began to draw together. They merged, flowing into one another until a single, colossal entity of absolute silence dominated the peak of the spire. It was a wall of nothingness, a void that advanced toward the loom, swallowing light and sound, intent on consuming their last, desperate hope before it could even be born. They raced through the realm on rivers of starlight, their hands moving faster than thought to gather the shimmering threads. Elara and the weavers plunged into the heart of heroic epics, the air ringing with the clash of swords and oaths of honor, pulling free strands of unwavering courage. They drifted through the quiet dawn of creation myths, where threads of pure potential hummed with the first words ever spoken. They did not overlook the smallest tales, the simple folk tales of a shared meal or a kindness repaid, knowing these held a different, essential strength. Each golden thread they collected was a tiny victory, causing the encroaching static of the forgetters to recoil and thin ever so slightly. But every story, pulled from its native tapestry, came at a cost. The realm itself began to flicker around them. A forest of singing crystals would vanish for a heartbeat, replaced by a hollow echo. A river of liquid memory would stutter, its flow reversing abruptly. It was as if the foundational reality of the place was becoming uncertain, its substance diluted by their desperate harvest, the weight of the choice pressed down on Elara. Which stories were essential enough to be woven into this new, protective narrative? A grand epic of a fallen king felt vital, but so did the quiet tale of a child comforting a friend. To exclude any was to risk its eventual fading, a loss that would make the world a little grayer. The decision crystallized within her as she watched the weavers begin to falter, their luminous forms growing dim. The oppressive silence of the enemy was not just an absence of sound. It was an active force, inducing lapses in the weaver's own memories, causing them to forget the next step in a pattern or lose the rhythm of a chant. Their confusion was a weapon. In that moment of clarity, Elara knew the realm's true strength was not in its grandest myths, but in its vast and beautiful diversity. She made her choice. "We take them all," she insisted, her voice cutting through the growing dissonance. The epic and the lullaby, the myth and the personal memory. A story does not need to be world-changing to change a single world. She reached for the smallest threads she could find, the tale of a child's first step, the memory of a grandmother's recipe, the quiet joy of finding a lost toy. These tiny, glowing filaments felt impossibly fragile in her hands, yet they pulsed with a resonant warmth that the grander narratives sometimes lack. This act of radical inclusion seemed to infuriate the void. The forgetters grew aggressively tangible, their static coalescing into shadowy, clawed figures that swiped at the gathered threads, trying to tear them from the weaver's grasp. The assault was not just physical. Elara felt a sudden, chilling fog in her own mind. The memory of Old Man Hemlock's face became blurry, the sound of his voice distant. The details of her own life in the archives began to soften at the edges, as if someone were gently erasing them. She was fighting not just for stories, but for her own story. Clutching the last thread, a simple, shining tale of a promise kept, she turned to the head weaver. "It is done." The great being, her form flickering with the strain of holding so many narratives in balance, gave a solemn nod. "The gathering is complete. Now we must weave." She gestured upward, toward the pinnacle of the spire, where the air itself seemed to vibrate with a final, terrible tension. The highest loom awaited, and with it, the last chance to save all they held dear. Threads of gold and silver snapped and vanished into the hungry static. The weaver's hands moved in a frantic blur, their luminous forms flickering as they tried to braid the new story into existence. But for every shimmering strand they secured, the forgetters unwove two more. The air itself was turning to gray mist, entire sections of the library-meadow dissolving into formless silence. Elara felt a cold dread that was not just fear for the realm, but for herself. A memory surfaced, bright and clear, her first day at the archives, the smell of old paper and wax, the overwhelming awe as she ran her fingers along her first ancient manuscript. Then, like smoke, the memory thinned, the feeling of the waxed wood under her fingers, the title of that very first book. It all slipped away, leaving a hollow, aching blankness in her mind. The forgetters were not just attacking the loom, they were erasing her. The head weaver, the anchor of this entire endeavor, staggered back from the loom. Her complex light dimmed, and a note of profound confusion chimed from her. I forget the pattern," she murmured, her filament hands falling still. The role of the keeper, the sequence of the binding chant, it fades. In that moment of catastrophic failure, all eyes, both luminous and human, turned to Elara. She was utterly alone, an untrained archivist, facing an army of oblivion, her own history crumbling at the edges. Terror threatened to paralyze her, but then she heard Old Man Hemlock's voice, not as a memory, but as a shield. A story is not a possession, it is a shared breath. She would not let his breath be silenced. She planted her feet before the faltering loom, the starlight needle glowing in one hand. With the other, she reached not for a weapon, but for a story. She began to speak, her voice cutting through the static. She did not recite an epic. She told the simple, quiet tale of Hemlock, mending a child's torn picture book, his patience as he glued each page, his belief that every story, no matter how small, was a universe. As she spoke, the words formed a barrier of warmth around her, and the cold numbness receded. She wove a shield from the memory of her mother's lullabies, a fortress from the camaraderie of fellow archivists, sharing tea over a difficult translation. Each personal story was a bulwark against the void, a declaration that her past, her connections, were hers to keep. The fate of two worlds now hung on this single, half-woven tapestry. Its incomplete threads pulsed with fragile light, the only thing holding back the tide of absolute nothingness. If it failed, the realm would vanish into silent static, and the connective tissue of human imagination, our capacity for wonder, for metaphor, for hope itself, would fray beyond repair. The grand narratives of heroes would be the first to go, but soon after, the quiet stories that teach a child empathy or comfort an adult in grief would follow, leaving a grayer, colder existence in their wake. In a sudden, piercing moment of clarity, Elara's hand went to the small, cool leaf from the grove of voices, still nestled safely in her satchel. This was not just a recording. It was a reservoir of pure meaning. Without a second thought, she pressed the luminous leaf directly into the heart of the unfinished weave. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. A torrent of preserved memory, the first laugh, the first tear, the foundational joy of a tale well told flooded the loom. The new story blazed with the combined light of 1,000 suns, its threads locking into place with the unshakable strength of eternity itself. The loom hummed with a new kind of music, as Elara's hands flew across the shimmering threads. Her voice rose and fell, weaving a narrative that celebrated the epic and the everyday in equal measure. She spoke of thunderous myths that shaped civilizations, quiet histories of ordinary lives, grand fictions that explored impossible worlds, and the simple, personal anecdotes shared between friends. With every word, she physically intertwined a corresponding thread, her movements guided by the memory leaf's reservoir of meaning. The disparate strands of gold, silver, and copper began to fuse, their light merging into a brilliant, cohesive rainbow that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The realm itself responded, the dissolving edges of the library-meadow solidifying, the gray static receding as if washed away by a wave of pure color. The forgetters, those voids of silence, recoiled from the radiance, their forms dissolving from menacing shadows into faint, harmless whispers that were soon lost to the restored harmony. Yet, as the final patterns of the tapestry locked into place, a single, glaring absence became clear. A space meant for a thread of the softest, most resilient light remained empty. The story of hope was missing from the story of stories. The great loom trembled, its mechanisms groaning under the strain of the incomplete weave. The brilliant light of their creation flickered, threatening to collapse into the very void they had just pushed back. All the preserved stories in the world were useless without the one that gave them meaning. Elara knew then that this thread could not be found or gathered. It had to be created. Closing her eyes, she turned inward, shutting out the trembling of the spire and the anxious chimes of the weavers. She reached into the fabric of her own life, sifting through her most cherished moments. She found the bright, sharp joy of her first discovery in the archives, the warmth of a shared laugh with a fellow scholar over a difficult text, the steadfast belief in magic that had carried her from a dusty library to this impossible realm. These were not just memories, they were the substance of her own hope. With a deep, steadying breath, she drew them forth. A single luminous thread, warm and alive, coalesced in her hands. It was fragile, pulsing with a personal, vulnerable light. Weaving it into the tapestry felt like giving away a piece of her soul, a sacrifice that left a hollow ache in its place. She felt emotionally exposed, as if a layer of her own joy had been permanently etched into the weave for all to see. But as the hope thread settled into its designated space, the effect was instantaneous and sublime. The completed tapestry erupted in a silent symphony of light and sound, a chord of pure narrative perfection that resonated through every fiber of the realm. The last remnants of the forgetters evaporated, not with a scream, but with a sigh, their static replaced by the clear, bright hum of 1,000 stories breathing in unison. The realm was saved, its revival now intrinsically tied to this new, living narrative. A wave of color and music erupted from the completed tapestry, washing over the realm in a cascade of pure renewal. Where there had been gray static and frayed threads, vibrant landscapes now surged back to life. The library-meadow's rivers of starlight ran clear and bright, and the singing crystals in the groves chimed with perfect, harmonic tones. Every frayed narrative was instantly repaired, its colors more brilliant than before, as if the great unraveling had only deepened their resilience. The weavers themselves stood tall, their luminous forms solidifying as their lost memories and abilities flooded back into them. their chiming voices now a chorus of clear, untroubled joy. And then, something new happened. From the restored tapestries, fresh story threads began to spontaneously generate, shimmering with unexplored potential, ensuring the realm's own creativity would now sustain it far into the future. Yet as Elara watched this breathtaking rebirth, a quiet worry took root in her heart. This world was saved, but her own remained disconnected. Without a renewed link to the human imagination, without shared belief and new stories flowing back and forth, this vibrant realm could, in time, slowly fade once more into a beautiful, forgotten echo. She turned to the head weaver, her idea already forming. "We need a permanent exchange," she proposed. "Let the realm send story seeds, the barest ideas for new myths and tales, to dreamers and artists in my world. In return, those who receive them will nurture the stories, tell them, and weave them into the human tapestry. Their belief, their creativity, will be the bond that sustains you." The head weaver considered this, the threads of her form shifting in contemplation. The balance would be delicate, she chimed. A flood of story seeds could overwhelm mortal minds, causing confusion rather than inspiration. But a trickle too small might not generate enough belief to sustain the realm's newfound vitality. It would require careful, ongoing stewardship, a role of immense responsibility. Seeing the wisdom and necessity in Elara's eyes, the great weaver agreed. She then extended her hands, and from the substance of the realm itself, she wove a pathway of condensed starlight that stretched toward the horizon, a bridge of shimmering constellations leading home. "You will be our ambassador," the weaver said, her voice filled with a newfound respect, "the guardian of the balance." As Elara stepped onto the starry bridge, she felt the weight of the title settle upon her. She was no longer just an archivist or a seeker. She was a living link between two worlds, carrying the fate of stories in her hands. The familiar path through the whispering woods felt different under Elara's feet. The air was still thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but the oppressive silence that had once judged her was gone, replaced by a gentle, listening quiet. A fox paused at the edge of the trail, its head cocked not in fear, but in curiosity, as if waiting to hear what she might say next. She stepped from the forest's edge and looked back toward the city, half expecting to find months had passed. Yet the position of the sun, the very chill in the air, was exactly as she had left it. No time had been lost in her world, but everything within her had changed. The cool weight of the locket against her chest, and the faint, warm glow of the memory leaf in her satchel, were proof that her journey had been real. A new purpose settled in her bones, as steady and certain as the turning of a page. She went directly to the archives, her boots echoing on the cold stone floor. The scent of old paper and dust was a sharp contrast to the living breath of the library-meadow. Archivist Kale was waiting for her at her own desk, his expression a mask of stern disapproval. "You have been absent for 3 days without word," he stated, his voice low and cutting. "Your position here was conditional upon adherence to our rules, not chasing forbidden fairy tales. Your recklessness has consequences." This was the moment she had feared, a direct conflict that threatened to sever her from the very place she needed to be. If she lost her position, how would she ever find the dreamers and artists who needed the story seeds? How could she be a bridge if she was cast out from one shore? Elara did not argue or try to explain the realm, the weavers, or the looming void. She knew such truths would sound like madness. Instead, she met his gaze and spoke softly. "May I share something I learned? It is a small story about a hummingbird." She began to tell the tale, not as a scholar reciting a text, but as a witness sharing a memory. She spoke of a tiny bird that refused to believe the mountain was too high to fly over, and how its persistent, humming flight eventually carved a path for the wind itself to follow. As she wove the narrative, her voice carried the conviction of someone who had seen stories mend reality. She did not just describe the hummingbird's determination, she embodied it. The dusty air in the archive seemed to grow still, and for a fleeting moment, the light from the high window appeared to dance. Kale, a man who had devoted his life to the dry bones of history, watched her, his rigid posture slowly softening. He saw not a disobedient junior archivist, but a young woman transformed, her eyes alight with a quiet, undeniable truth. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "Your dedication to unorthodox research is noted," he said, his tone grudgingly shifting. "You may keep your position, but this fascination with myth must remain within the bounds of academic study. Do not force me to regret this." The victory was fragile, a narrow ledge on which her entire mission now balanced. Her ability to guide the story seeds depended entirely on maintaining this delicate facade, on being the quiet, unassuming archivist by day, while secretly tending to the flow of narrative between worlds. That night, in her small room above the archives, she carefully laid out her notes. The events of the realm felt both vivid and impossibly distant. How could she possibly begin? As if in answer, a soft breeze stirred the curtain at her open window. Drifting on the air was a single, perfect dandelion puff, but this one glowed with a gentle, internal light. It floated across the room as if carried by intent, landing softly in the center of her desk. The tiny seeds shimmered, each one holding the barest whisper of a story yet to be born. The exchange had begun. Her work was no longer about seeking a forgotten realm. It was about nurturing the stories it sent and ensuring they found a home in the waking world. The first story seed felt impossibly light in Elara's palm, a speck of dust that pulsed with a soft, golden warmth. She knew the archive's hidden garden was the only place it could grow, a forgotten courtyard where sunlight filtered through a canopy of ivy, and the air smelled of rich, damp soil. Under the cover of twilight, she knelt and pressed the seed into the earth, her whispered hope for its safe growth, a quiet promise to the realm itself. By morning, something impossible had taken root. A bush now stood where the seed had been, its branches a tangle of silver-veined wood, its leaves shimmering with a faint, internal light. They called it the Whispering Bush, for when the wind passed through, the leaves did not simply rustle. They murmured, they told stories, they spoke of a city built on the back of a slumbering turtle, of a key that could unlock the song in a stone, of a child who could converse with the moon. These were not tales from any book in the archives. They were new, fresh, and alive. The children found it first, drawn by the low, musical hum that seemed to emanate from the garden walls. They would creep in after their lessons, sitting cross-legged on the mossy stones, their eyes wide as the whispering leaves spun narratives they had never imagined. Their quiet listening soon blossomed into a storm of creativity. They returned to the garden with chalk to draw the turtle city on the cobblestones, with clay to sculpt the singing key, with their own voices to tell each other what the moon might have said in reply. The hidden garden, once silent and still, became a vibrant hub of shared invention, but such a conspicuous bloom of magic could not stay hidden for long. Archivist Kale discovered them one afternoon, his shadow falling over the enraptured circle of children. His gaze was not on their joyful faces, but on the impossible bush, its unnatural growth and whispering leaves, a direct challenge to his ordered world of ink and parchment. "This is a rare archival specimen," Elara explained swiftly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stepped between Kale and the shimmering leaves. "A cultivar thought lost to history, recently rediscovered in my research. Its unique properties seem to encourage narrative recall." She chose her words with the precision of a scholar, framing the miraculous within the plausible. She spoke of oral traditions and mnemonic devices, of how certain plants were once used by storytellers to focus their memories. To speak of weavers or story seeds would see the bush torn out by its roots. To her immense relief, Kale's suspicion warred with his academic curiosity. He granted a cautious, probationary approval, viewing it as an unusual but potentially valuable historical exhibit. Seizing this fragile opening, Elara made a decisive choice. She would not hide the bush. She would cultivate it openly, announcing it as an experimental project to revive local storytelling. She began hosting small gatherings, inviting the community to listen and, more importantly, to contribute their own tales. The stakes of this public cultivation were terrifyingly high. If the bush was accepted, it could become a permanent, thriving channel for the realm's story seeds, a beacon that would strengthen the bond between worlds with every new story it inspired. But if it was rejected, if Kale or the town council deemed it dangerous or unnatural, it would be destroyed. That first, vital thread of magic would be severed, and the delicate balance she was meant to guard would be broken before it had even truly begun. Yet, the bush's popularity only grew. Its fame spread beyond the children, drawing curious archivists from neighboring towns and traveling storytellers who had felt a strange, compelling pull in their dreams. They came to the garden, and in their eyes, Elara saw not just curiosity, but a flicker of recognition, a hint of the same magic that had guided her, a silent understanding that they too were part of the story. The whispering bush's quiet music drew more than just curious listeners. It called to a specific few, those whose hearts were already tuned to the frequency of myth. Elara knew she could not guide the growing stream of story seeds alone. In the deepest quiet of the archives, she formed a secret circle, the Ambassador's Council. Old Man Hemlock joined her, his presence a grounding thread to the realm's ancient past. With him came a soft-spoken teacher named Lena, who saw how stories unlocked wonder in her students, and a wandering musician called Reese, whose melodies seemed to speak of places he had never physically seen. Their purpose was delicate and profound. They would help identify the dreamers, the quiet artists and thoughtful souls most receptive to the gentle touch of a story seed, ensuring each one found fertile ground. This small network soon became a hidden lattice of story guardians. They met by moonlight in Hemlock's willow-shrouded cottage, sharing their experiences in hushed, excited tones. Lena spoke of a shy student who, after a story seed about a shadow puppet that came to life, began to weave breathtaking tales of her own. Reese described a new melody that had come to him in a dream, a tune that listeners swore sounded like a forgotten lullaby from their own childhoods. Each shared success was another thread strengthening the bond between the worlds, a quiet testament to their shared purpose. But with any gathering of passionate hearts, conflict was inevitable. Reese, the musician, felt the power of the stories so keenly that his enthusiasm began to curdle into impatience. Why whisper these gifts when we could sing them from the rooftops? He argued during one tense meeting. We could broadcast the seeds to thousands, create a wave of new stories overnight. The risk in his proposal was a cold dread in Elara's stomach. Such a flood would be impossible to control. The seeds could be exploited, their magic diluted into cheap entertainment, or twisted into tools for manipulation, their pure intent lost. The realm's delicate balance, so recently restored, would be shattered by such a blunt force. Elara faced him not with anger, but with the calm certainty she had learned in the Grove of Voices. A story is not a broadcast, she reminded the council. It is a conversation. It needs the quiet space of a single mind to take root and blossom. If we force it upon the world, it becomes noise, and its magic fades. True belief cannot be manufactured on a mass scale. It must be discovered, like a secret garden or a hidden path. Her words, woven from her own hard-won wisdom, slowly deflated Riss' fervor. He saw the potential for harm in his own grand vision, and with a reluctant nod, he agreed to their code of subtle guidance. The stakes of their internal debate could not be higher. A single misstep, one story seed, planted in a heart ruled by greed or a desire for influence, and the entire endeavor could collapse. The magic could be harvested for profit, turning living narratives into hollow commodities. The realm would feel this corruption as a sickness, its vibrant threads once again threatened by a taint born not of silence, but of distortion. Their monthly meetings were not just a sharing of joys, but a vital check on this fragile equilibrium. After the council had departed into the night, Hemlock motioned for Elara to stay. He led her to a corner of his cottage where a potted vine, grown from a story seed he had nurtured, now climbed the wall. Its leaves shimmered with a soft, silver light, and from its stems hung fruits that looked like tiny, glowing lanterns. Each one, he whispered, contains an entire miniature myth. They are not yet ready to be picked, but they are proof. The bond is strong, and the stories are thriving. He gently cupped one of the luminous fruits, its light pulsing gently in the dim room, a silent promise of the countless worlds still waiting to be born. The town square shimmered under a canopy of paper lanterns, each one painted with a scene from a local legend or a child's dream. Elara watched as the community gathered, not as an audience, but as participants in the first festival of tales. The whispering bush stood at the center, its luminous leaves humming a soft, welcoming melody, while Old Man Hemlock carefully arranged his myth fruits on a velvet cloth, their gentle glow casting shifting patterns on the cobblestones. People of all ages stepped forward, their voices rising to share personal anecdotes, family histories, and flights of pure imagination. A baker told a tale of a loaf of bread that never grew stale, woven from a story seed about enduring kindness. A musician played a new melody that seemed to contain the whisper of a forest stream. The air itself felt charged with a creative energy, a tangible sign that the bond between the worlds was strengthening with every shared narrative. This was more than a celebration. It was the living proof of their mission, a public declaration that stories were the lifeblood of their community. Yet in the midst of the laughter and music, a man stood apart, his arms crossed and his expression one of open skepticism. He was a scholar from a neighboring city, a man named Alistair, who had built his reputation on debunking what he called provincial superstitions. He had come specifically to challenge the growing legend of the town's magical revival. When a lull fell in the proceedings, his voice cut through the pleasant air. "This is charming folklore," he stated, his tone cool and analytical. "But you present these tales as if they hold some inherent power. Can you prove they are anything more than well-crafted entertainment designed to delight children?" All eyes turned to Elara, the festival's organizer. The success of their entire movement now hinged on this single, public moment. If she failed to answer him, his skepticism could spread, painting their efforts as mere quaint nonsense and isolating their town from potential allies. Elara did not rise to his argument. She did not quote ancient texts or speak of weavers and realms. Instead, she smiled softly and gestured to a young girl who was waiting patiently near the whispering bush, clutching a small, hand-drawn book. "I cannot prove it to you with facts," Elara said, her voice calm, "but perhaps she can." She invited the skeptic to simply listen. The girl, no more than 7 years old, stepped forward and began to tell a story about a star that was afraid of the dark. It was a simple narrative, yet it was woven with such raw sincerity and unwavering belief that the square fell completely silent as the girl described the star finding courage by listening to the stories of the other constellations. Her eyes shone with an absolute, unshakable truth. Alistair, the rational scholar, found himself not analyzing the plot, but captivated by the pure conviction in her voice. He watched the way the crowd leaned in, not as passive listeners, but as co-creators of the moment. The hard lines of his skepticism began to soften, not because he was presented with evidence, but because he was reminded of a feeling he had long forgotten, the simple magic of believing in a story. The festival ended under a blanket of stars, the paper lanterns glowing like captured constellations. As the last of the townsfolk drifted away, their conversations buzzing with new ideas and collaborations, Elara felt a familiar warmth against her chest. She touched the locket holding the anchor myth, and it pulsed once, gently, as if in approval. Looking up at the night sky, she knew the realm was watching, its vitality renewed by the flourishing creativity it had helped to inspire. The festival was not an end, but a beginning. Its success meant the story seed movement could now spread, carried by travelers and artists to other communities, weaving a wider net of shared imagination. Yet this very growth brought new vulnerabilities. A larger network would be harder to protect, and the attention they were attracting could draw not just curious skeptics, but those with far more dangerous intentions. The balance remained as delicate as a spider's web, glistening with dew in the starlight, beautiful and strong, but waiting for the next gust of wind. The forest path felt like an old friend now, its familiar turns leading Elara back to the stone archway, nestled in its serene glade. This time, she did not come with a story on her lips, but with the locket warm in her palm. She opened it, and the anchor myth's light did not blaze, but flowed, a steady, gentle stream that washed over the ancient stones. The air within the arch shimmered, not with chaotic potential, but with a deep, settled clarity, resolving into a view of the starlit library-meadow. A weaver stood on the other side, its form a tranquil constellation of intertwined light. With a graceful step, it crossed the threshold, its presence causing the very air in the glade to hum with a soft, harmonious frequency. The weaver observed the lingering energy of the festival, its chiming voice a whisper of delight. It gestured toward the town, where the last paper lanterns still glowed in the distance like grounded stars. Your shared breaths have woven a new song, it chimed. The realm feels it. To witness this, it is a validation we have not known for ages. From its own luminous form, the weaver plucked a single, radiant thread of silver gold and laid it gently upon the stone archway. The thread sank into the rock, becoming a permanent, faintly glowing vein in the ancient structure. This is our bridge, it declared, a path that will not fade, so long as your world remembers how to listen. But the weaver's tone grew solemn, its light dimming slightly. This connection is a living thing, it cautioned. It requires the water of belief and the sunlight of new tales. If the stories ever become mere noise, if they are valued only for profit or power and lose their heart, the thread will dim. The gateway will not shatter, but it will slowly seal itself, protecting the realm from a silence born of apathy. The balance is not a victory to be won, but a garden that must be tended every single day. Elara looked from the glowing thread in the arch to the sleeping town below, understanding the profound responsibility now resting on their shoulders. We will not let that happen, she vowed, her voice steady with conviction. Storytelling will become the bedrock of our community, taught in our schools and celebrated in our homes. We will ensure that every child learns that their own imagination is a vital thread in a tapestry larger than themselves. The permanent bridge was a double-edged sword. It meant the realm was now intrinsically linked to the fickle heart of humanity, vulnerable to their distractions and disenchantments. Yet it also promised a continuous, enriching exchange, a flow of myth and memory that could elevate both worlds to heights neither could reach alone. The weaver gave a final, approving chime and stepped back through the archway, which settled into a calm, steady shimmer. Elara stood alone in the quiet glade, watching the silver gold thread pulse with a slow, rhythmic light. It was the heartbeat of stories flowing between worlds, a silent promise that as long as one person believed in magic, the door would remain open. The heavy oak doors of the archive's west wing swung open to reveal a space transformed. Dusty shelves had been replaced with softly glowing panels that pulsed with color, and the air hummed with the faint, melodic whisper of ancient tales. With Archivist Kale's cautious approval, Elara had poured the realm's inspiration into creating the interactive story hall. Visitors no longer just read about the myth of the celestial turtle. They stood on a platform that gently swayed, surrounded by projections of starry skies, feeling as if they were riding on the great creature's back. They could touch replicas of the singing key and hear its chime resonate through the floor, a tactile echo of a story's heart. The hall was not a rejection of history, but its resurrection, a place where myth was felt as much as it was understood. People left not just informed, but transformed, speaking of dreams where they spoke to rivers, or of sudden, brilliant ideas for inventions and artworks that felt gifted from another world. This vibrant success, however, ignited a quiet war within the academic community. A faction of traditional scholars, led by a stern historian named Master Thuron, viewed the hall as a theatrical disgrace. They argued in hushed, tense meetings that it reduced profound cultural heritage to mere amusement, stripping away the rigor and context that gave these stories their true weight. To them, the flickering lights and sensory experiences cheapened the sacred act of study, turning a temple of knowledge into a common fairground. The archive's very soul, they claimed, was being traded for fleeting wonder. Elara heard their arguments not as an attack, but as a fear she understood. Instead of defending her work with passion, she answered it with a scholar's precision. She redesigned each exhibit, pairing the interactive experience with a quiet alcove. Next to the platform where you could feel the turtle's movement, she placed the original, fragmented manuscript that described it, along with a map tracing the myth's migration across continents. She showed that the singing key's melody was based on a recovered musical notation from a forgotten culture. Her message was clear and revolutionary. Wonder was not the enemy of scholarship, but its most powerful ally. The sensory experience hooked the heart, and the historical context satisfied the mind, each making the other more meaningful. The fate of this new approach hung in a delicate balance. If the hall succeeded, it could redefine the mission of archives everywhere, proving they could be living centers of cultural heartbeat rather than just repositories for the past. But if it was dismissed as a mere novelty, it would validate the traditionalists' fears and set back the integration of storytelling into academic spaces for a generation. The debate was about more than one wing of a building. It was a battle for the future of how we connect with our own history. On the evening of the hall's official opening ceremony, as Elara watched a crowd move through the exhibits with wide, enchanted eyes, a single, luminous story seed drifted down from the vaulted ceiling. It bypassed the scholars and the officials, dancing on an unseen current of air until it landed softly in the open palm of a shy child, lingering near the back. The boy looked down at the speck of light in his hand, then up at his mother, his face filled with a quiet, profound awe. Without a word, he sat right there on the marble floor, pulled a stubby piece of charcoal from his pocket, and began to draw on a scrap of paper. His lines were swift and sure, taking the form of a creature no bestiary had ever recorded, a being with wings of woven moss and eyes like liquid amber, a living myth born directly from the realm's gift. Leo's drawings began to fill his bedroom walls, a sprawling tapestry of creatures with feathers of falling leaves and rivers that sang in harmonies only he could transcribe. Each day after school, he would add to his story journal, his small hand moving with a focus far beyond his years. His classmates, first curious and then inspired, started their own journals, filling them with tales of clockwork dragons and gardens grown from laughter. A quiet transformation bloomed in their classroom after Leo wrote a heartfelt story about a lonely feline hero who guarded a garden of lost things. A skittish stray cat that roamed the schoolyard began following him home, its demeanor shifting to one of gentle, unwavering companionship. The line between his imaginative world and the tangible one seemed to soften in the most benevolent of ways. This subtle magic, however, quickly became a source of deep concern for his parents. They watched their son's vibrant inner life with growing unease, worried that his daydreams were becoming too real, that he was losing his grip on the everyday world. They came to Elara one evening, their expressions etched with a fear every parent understands, the desire to protect their child from unseen harms. "Is this safe?" they asked her, their voices tight with anxiety. Are these seeds causing him to confuse what is real with what is not? Elara listened with a calm patience, seeing in their worry a reflection of her own past doubts. She did not speak of weavers or realms. Instead, she shared her own story of how believing in something larger than herself had not narrowed her world, but had expanded it, teaching her deeper empathy and a more profound connection to others. The story seeds do not create delusion, she explained gently. They nurture a different way of seeing. They enhance creativity and compassion, giving children a language for the magic they already feel instinctively. She offered to work with Leo to help him learn the beautiful balance between a soaring imagination and the grounded steps of daily life. The stakes of this single conversation felt immense. If parents began to withdraw their children from the storytelling movement, it could stifle a budding generation's creative spirit and subtly weaken the vital flow of energy back to the realm. Yet if they learn to trust this process, it could unlock a wave of innovation and empathy, raising a generation for whom wonder was a native language. After a long, thoughtful silence, Leo's parents agreed to support him, their trust in Elara's guidance outweighing their fear. The very next day, Leo arrived at the interactive story hall with his newest journal entry. He showed Elara a drawing of a magnificent bridge woven from strands of sunlight and starlight, describing it in vivid detail as a path that connected two great, whispering libraries. Elara felt a shiver of recognition, for his description mirrored the newly solidified gateway in the forest, glade with an uncanny precision. The child's imagination was not just receiving stories, it was now actively reflecting and reinforcing the bond between the worlds, a beautiful symbiosis, growing stronger with every tale he told. The silver gold thread in the archway pulsed with a gentle, steady rhythm, a constant reminder of the promise Elara carried. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet, the light within the stone gateway shimmered and deepened. The head weaver stepped through, her form a constellation of tranquil light that cast no shadow on the mossy ground. In her filament hands, she carried a simple wooden box, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. She placed it in Elara's hands without a word, the contact sending a wave of warm certainty through her fingers. Inside lay a small, beautifully carved loom, a spindle of iridescent threads that hummed with soft potential, and a guide written not in ink, but in light. "This is a seed loom," the weaver chimed, her voice a melody of distant bells. "With it, you can weave the essence of your own stories into a form that others can feel." Elara began her work in the quiet solitude of her room. Following the luminous guide, she wove the threads into a small tapestry depicting the town's founding myth, the tale of the first settlers guided by a flock of silver-winged birds. As the final thread was secured, the tapestry began to emit a soft, calming energy, a gentle hum that felt like a shared memory. When she hung it in the town's meeting hall, something remarkable happened. People lingered after meetings, their conversations softer, their laughter more frequent. A long-standing disagreement between two neighbors over a property line was resolved with unexpected ease, both parties speaking of a sudden clarity and a desire for harmony. The tapestry was not just a picture, it was a catalyst, encouraging connection and quieting discord. Word of the tapestry's mysterious effect spread faster than Elara could weave. Requests poured in from every corner of the community, from the schoolhouse, hoping to soothe anxious children, to the town square, where merchants sought to foster honest trade. Her hands grew tired, the luminous threads seeming to draw from her own vitality as she worked late into the night. The magical origin of her creations was a secret she had sworn to protect, but the sheer demand threatened to expose everything. She could not sustain this alone, and hoarding the practice felt like a betrayal of the very gift she had been given. Gathering the ambassadors' council in the moonlit garden, Elara laid the weaver's kit before them. "I cannot be the only weaver," she explained, her voice weary but resolute. "The magic is not meant for one pair of hands, but for many. This is not about creating perfect art, but about sharing the intent." She taught them the basic patterns, showing them how to hold the humming threads and focus their own hopes for the community into the weave. Lena, the teacher, wove a tapestry of a classroom where every child felt seen. Reese wove one of a town square filled with music and shared stories. It was clumsy at first, their individual tapestries smaller and their glow less brilliant, but they were genuine and they worked. The craft was becoming a shared tradition, its power distributed and sustainable. The true test came when they decided to create a single, large tapestry together, a depiction of the town's founding myth to hang in the new community center. For weeks, they worked in shifts, their hands passing the shimmering threads back and forth, their quiet conversations and focused intentions becoming part of the tapestry itself. The night they tied the final knot, a collective hush fell over the group. The completed tapestry, vast and intricate, began to glow with a unified, brilliant light. A wave of palpable warmth washed through the room, and every person present, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, felt a profound surge of collective pride and connection, a deep, resonant understanding that their individual stories were threads in the town's grand, ongoing narrative. The Story Cycle program began not as an initiative, but as a natural outgrowth of the town's newfound creative pulse. Elara set up a simple, beautiful chest of polished cedar wood in the interactive story hall, inviting anyone to contribute a written tale, a drawing, or even a recorded whisper of a personal memory. Each month, the community would gather to read the submissions aloud, and the stories that resonated most deeply, that caused a collective hush or a ripple of knowing nods, were chosen to be woven into a communal tapestry or performed at the next festival of tales. This created a beautiful feedback loop where appreciation fueled further creation, and every contributor could see their narrative become part of the town's living fabric. One of the most profound consequences was the bridge it built between generations. Elders who had once felt their memories were gathering dust began sharing oral histories of the town's founding struggles and long-forgotten local legends. In turn, the youth took these narratives and reinterpreted them through digital art, modern music, and short plays, ensuring the core truths evolved without being lost to time. A story about a great-grandfather's journey to the city for work became a poignant animated short about connection and distance, its emotional core resonating with everyone who saw it. Inevitably, a complex debate surfaced during one selection meeting. A young woman had submitted a raw, beautifully written account of her family's experience with a significant hardship generations ago, a narrative steeped in loss and resilience. Some on the council argued passionately for its inclusion. "These are the stories that shape us," Lena insisted. They are essential truths, and pretending history was only cheerful is a different kind of forgetting. Others, however, hesitated. Our program is a place of comfort, one merchant countered. Would such a heavy tale overshadow the joy we have worked so hard to cultivate? Could it discourage others from sharing? Elara listened to both sides with deep respect. When she spoke, her voice was calm and inclusive. She did not frame it as a choice between light and dark, but as an expansion of understanding. True comfort does not only come from happiness, she guided them. It often comes from the profound relief of shared experience, from seeing our own challenges reflected and understood in another's story. By embracing the full spectrum of our narratives, we do not disrupt our cozy atmosphere. We deepen it, making it strong enough to hold all of us, exactly as we are. Her perspective shifted the conversation, and the group agreed to include the story, deciding to present it with the care and context it deserved. The stakes of this balance were far more than artistic. Elara felt it in the subtle energy of the story seeds and the pulse of the gateway thread. A community that told only bright, happy tales would generate a vibrant but potentially shallow energy, like a garden with only one type of flower. Conversely, a focus solely on hardship could pull the realm's energy toward melancholy, dimming its luminous threads. Careful, compassionate curation was not about censorship, but about maintaining a healthy ecosystem of narrative, where every story had its place and purpose. After the first public telling of that bittersweet family legend, a hush fell over the audience. There were tears, but also a powerful sense of connection, a shared recognition of endurance. Later that evening, as Elara walked through the hidden garden, she witnessed a quiet miracle. The story seeds, which typically bloomed with a golden daylight glow, had instead produced a patch of delicate, night-blooming flowers. Their petals were a deep, velvety blue, and they emitted a soft, consoling silver light, a gentle luminescence that seemed to acknowledge sorrow while offering peace. It was the realm's way of showing that every true emotion, when given voice, contributes its own unique and necessary light to the world. The stone archway no longer waited in silence, but greeted Elara with a low, welcoming hum as she approached. Each visit revealed a realm more vibrant than the last. Entire new regions had blossomed into being, shimmering into existence along the banks of the memory rivers. One particularly dazzling area, which the weavers called the Garden of Innovations, was a living gallery of clockwork creatures and structures spun from light, its forms echoing the inventive drawings flowing from Leo and his friends. The central loom now proudly displayed tapestries woven with the very images from the town's festival of tales, their threads pulsing with the familiar energy of community and shared laughter. Human creativity was not just a visitor here, it was a fundamental force of nature, actively shaping and expanding the mythical landscape. Yet this beautiful interdependence carried a delicate fragility. During a visit shortly after a period of severe storms had battered the coastal regions of her world, Elara felt the realm shudder. The harmonious hum faltered into a dissonant tremor, and several of the newer, more delicate tapestries flickered, their colors dimming for a heart-stopping moment. The weavers explained with solemn chimes that the realm's stability was now intimately tied to the emotional and environmental climate of its source. Widespread fear, conflict, or natural hardship in the human world sent destabilizing ripples across the bridge, threatening the very stories they had worked so hard to preserve. This revelation shifted Elara's role from an ambassador to a guardian. She could not prevent every storm or hardship, but she could help fortify the connection against them. She returned home and immediately proposed the Calm Stories project. During times of collective stress, the community would consciously focus on creating and sharing soothing narratives, tales of quiet resilience, of gentle humor, of simple, enduring kindness. These were not meant to ignore difficulty, but to build a bedrock of emotional stability beneath it. Weaving these specific narratives became a form of proactive stewardship, a way to send threads of peace and resilience back through the gateway, helping to steady the realm against the tremors of a troubled world. The stakes of this practice were no longer abstract. A major crisis in her world, whether a natural disaster or a deep social conflict, would no longer just be a human tragedy. It would strike directly at the heart of the realm, potentially causing sections of it to unravel or fade into gray static once more. Fostering positivity and resilience through stories was no longer just an artistic pursuit. It was a protective necessity, a vital act of preservation for two worlds now inextricably linked. When Elara returned from the realm after one such calibration visit, she found she was already behind. A family in the community was facing a significant personal hardship, and without any prompt, a story chain had already begun. Neighbors and friends were quietly sharing tales of overcoming past challenges, of unexpected help arriving in dark moments, of small, steadfast hopes that saw people through. Their words, whispered over fences and written in simple notes, were weaving a tangible safety net of support around the family, a living tapestry of comfort that was doubtless already sending its own steadying light back through the archway, strengthening both worlds at once. Years later, a new book appeared on shelves, its cover embossed with the familiar, swirling patterns of a star chart. Elara's work, The Realm of the First Storytellers, was not a dry academic text or a simple fantasy. It was a unique tapestry woven from personal memoir, collected myths, and gentle, practical guidance on how to listen for the stories humming in the quiet spaces of our own lives. It quickly became a cherished text, read aloud in classrooms and discussed by families over evening meals. The book sparked a quiet, global revival. People began to look at their own local folklore, not as forgotten relics, but as living maps to shared values. New story guardian councils, inspired by Elara's original circle, formed in distant countries, each adapting the principles to their own cultural stories, creating a worldwide network of narrative caretakers. Not everyone welcomed this resurgence. Some critics, particularly from more rigid academic circles, publicly accused Elara of fictionalizing her experiences, of dressing up charming folk tales as profound spiritual truths. The debate could have consumed her, but she made a conscious choice. She would not engage in the argument. Instead, she focused on the tangible, positive changes she could see. She traveled tirelessly, mentoring new guardians in different lands, always emphasizing the core values she had learned in the realm: curiosity, empathy, and the simple, radical act of belief. The stakes of her legacy were immense. If passed on with care, it could inspire centuries of vibrant, adaptive storytelling, strengthening the bond between worlds for generations. But if the practice became a rigid dogma, or if its magic was diluted into a passing trend. The living connection could weaken, and the stories could slowly lose their power once more. At a bustling book signing in her old hometown, a familiar, frail figure waited patiently at the end of the long line. When Old Man Hemlock finally stood before her, his eyes held a profound, quiet pride. He did not ask for a signature. Instead, he placed a single, new story seed into her palm. This one was not a speck of dust or a glowing leaf. It was shaped like a perfect, miniature quill, its feather shimmering with iridescent colors. His smile was a silent blessing, an acknowledgement that her story was now the one being written, and that the work of the First Storytellers was in the most capable of hands. The world now had its own loom, a digital tapestry woven not from threads of light, but from the shared breath of millions. Elara, her hair now touched with silver, watched as the global story platform hummed to life, its interface a symphony of flowing light code inspired by the realm's own magic. People from every corner of the earth could now contribute their narratives, from a grandmother in a remote village recording a folktale on a simple device, to a digital artist animating a myth for a new generation. Each story became a luminous node in a vast, ever-expanding constellation of human experience, a living library accessible to anyone with an internet connection and a curious heart. The energy generated by this collective act of sharing was palpable. In the realm, a breathtaking new wing shimmered into existence, its architecture a fluid blend of organic crystal and ethereal data streams, a direct reflection of this digital renaissance. Yet, with such open access came profound concerns. Whispers of a harvesting, and the potential for manipulated narratives began to circulate. Could a platform built on genuine connection be twisted into a tool for spreading misinformation or eroding privacy? Elara knew the very soul of the project was at stake. A digital space, cluttered with inauthentic stories, would generate a chaotic, dissonant energy, weakening the bond and polluting the realm's new digital wing with static. Her response was to build trust directly into the system's foundation. She championed a community-based moderation model where seasoned story guardians and trained volunteers from diverse cultures would review content, not with a censor's heavy hand, but with a gardener's discerning eye, nurturing authenticity and weeding out malice. She paired this with a global initiative for digital literacy, teaching people how to recognize the resonant hum of a true story and shield themselves from the jarring noise of manipulation. The governance of this digital loom became as vital as the stories it held. Left unchecked, it could be co-opted by forces seeking to control narratives rather than liberate them, turning a sanctuary for imagination into just another algorithm designed to capture attention. But if governed with wisdom and transparency, it could truly democratize storytelling, giving a powerful voice to the quiet and the overlooked. The first global story wave was a quiet miracle, a surge of personal tales, cultural rediscoveries, and collaborative myths that flowed through the platform. As the data streams peaked with this pure, creative output, Elara, standing in the forest glade, felt a corresponding warmth pulse from the stone archway, a gentle, undeniable confirmation that the realm was not just surviving, but evolving in beautiful synchrony with humanity itself. The silver in Elara's hair was not a mark of age so much as a map of all the stories she had carried. She watched the vibrant energy of the new story guardians with a deep, quiet pride, but also with a new and pressing clarity. The role of ambassador was not a crown to be worn forever, but a torch meant to be passed. She began to quietly observe a young digital artist named Maya, whose virtual storyscapes seemed to hum with the same resonant frequency as the realm's own luminous threads. Maya did not just tell stories, she built worlds you could step inside, her art a perfect bridge between ancient magic and modern wonder. One evening, as the lanterns were being lit for the festival, Elara invited Maya to the stone archway. The gateway pulsed gently, casting their faces in a soft, silver-gold light. Elara's hands, which had once trembled holding the starlight needle, were steady as she opened the locket and placed the weaver's kit into Maya's palms. "I am entrusting you with our most vital connection," Elara said, her voice a soft echo of the weaver's chimes. "The realm now speaks your language as well as it speaks mine. It is time." The weight of the responsibility was immediate and terrifying for Maya. She looked from the ancient tools to Elara's calm, lined face, her own heart a frantic drum. "How can I possibly fill your role?" she whispered, her voice thick with doubt. "You are a legend. Everyone will expect you, and they will only see me failing." This fear created a subtle but palpable tension in their work. Maya's first attempts to weave with the luminous threads were hesitant, the patterns she created beautiful but safe, lacking the bold confidence of her digital art. She was trying to replicate Elara's legacy instead of building her own, and the realm responded with a faint, uncertain hum. Elara felt a familiar ache, the deep-seated worry of a mentor letting go of a life's work. But she recognized the paralysis of comparison, and she knew the stories themselves held the answer. "You think you are stepping into my footsteps," Elara told her gently one afternoon. "But the path is not behind you. It unfolds with every new story you choose to tell. Do not try to be me. The realm does not need a second Elara. It needs the first Maya. Trust the narratives. They will guide your hands." With those words, Elara consciously stepped back, moving from a leader to a trusted advisor. She created the space Maya needed to breathe, to experiment, and to stumble. The consequences of this transition were felt by both worlds. A smooth, confident passing of the quill was essential. Any prolonged period of uncertainty or self-doubt in the ambassador could cause the story cycle to stutter, weakening the flow of creative energy and making the bond between worlds feel fragile once more. Yet if they succeeded, it would prove the legacy was not tied to one person, but was a living tradition that could evolve and strengthen with each new generation. The true test came at the annual Festival of Tales. Maya stood before the community, the new locket cool against her skin. Instead of recounting an old myth, she began to tell a story she had composed herself, a tale of a young woman who painted with light, whose colors could heal a fractured landscape. As she spoke, she subtly wove the tale with the threads from the kit, her movements gaining confidence. And then, something wondrous occurred. The whispering bush, which had bloomed with golden flowers for Elara's stories, began to shimmer. New buds swelled along its silver branches, bursting open not as gold, but as blossoms of vibrant, electric blue and glowing magenta, their colors shifting and swirling in perfect harmony with Maya's digital-inspired narrative. The realm was not just accepting the new ambassador, it was celebrating her, adapting its own beauty to reflect the fresh perspective she brought. The bond was secure, and the story was ready for its next, magnificent chapter. The cottage, nestled against the edge of the whispering woods, was built from river stones and woven willow, its chimney puffing gentle smoke into the twilight. Here, Elara finally rested. Her days were no longer filled with grand quests or diplomatic missions, but with the quiet rhythm of ink on paper and the soft click of her loom. She welcomed all who came to her door with a story on their lips or a question in their heart, offering spiced tea and a listening ear. Her home became a living sanctuary, a cozy hearth where myth and memory intertwined. The very air inside seemed to hum with a gentle, knowing energy, and it was often filled with the soft murmur of shared tales and the warm sound of laughter. Outside, foxes would pause by the windowsill as if listening, and the surrounding flowers bloomed in impossible, luminous colors, creating a small, perfect echo of the realm's own harmony. There were moments, often in the deep quiet of the afternoon, when a flicker of the old yearning would stir within her. She would watch a young guardian set off for the archway with a determined glint in their eye, and she would feel the ghost of an ache for the vibrant chaos of the realm, for the weight of the starlight needle in her hand. But the feeling always passed, replaced by a profound and settled peace. She had learned the hardest lesson for any pioneer, to step aside and trust the path to those who came after. She gently resisted the urge to correct a weaving technique or suggest a different narrative approach, understanding that her interference, however well-intentioned, could stifle the very creativity the work needed to thrive. Her focus turned inward, to the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent between two worlds. She began the meticulous work of filling a series of large, leather-bound journals. These were not meant to be instruction manuals, but something far more personal, a tapestry of her experiences. She filled them with intricate illustrations of the realm's flora and fauna, transcribed the chiming songs of the weavers, and recorded the subtle principles of narrative energy she had observed. She decided that this personal archive, this quiet legacy of ink and insight, would be her final and most meaningful contribution, a resource left for future guardians to discover in their own time and in their own way. The stakes of this endeavor were beautifully delicate. If her writings were received as a rigid doctrine, a set of rules to be followed without question, they could accidentally fossilize the living practice of storytelling, turning a dynamic art into a static religion. The magic depended on personal interpretation and fresh belief, not on perfect replication. Her words needed to serve as a compass, not a cage, encouraging each new generation to find their own path to the narrative truth. She wrote with this balance constantly in mind, framing her guidance as questions and observations rather than commands, hoping to inspire curiosity rather than obedience. One cool evening, as she sat by the crackling fire, adding a final flourish to a journal entry, a soft breeze stirred the pages. A single story seed, glowing with a gentle amber light, drifted through the open window. It danced on the warm air currents of the room before settling gracefully upon the fresh ink of her page. As it touched the paper, it did not dissolve, but instead unfolded like a tiny, luminous flower. A new tale, one she had never heard or read, began to write itself in lines of shimmering light across the page. It was a simple story about a moth woven from moonlight who carried forgotten dreams back to sleepers. Elara smiled, a deep warmth spreading through her chest. It was not a summons or a test. It was a gift, a quiet reminder that the realm was still speaking to her, sharing its endless creativity with the one who had first learned how to listen. The stone archway was now almost unrecognizable beneath a living tapestry of ivy. Its leaves shimmered with a soft, internal light, pulsing in complex patterns that shifted from the deep green of ancient epics to the bright gold of new discoveries. Elara reached out, her fingertips gently brushing a cluster of leaves. A wave of pure, warm gratitude flowed into her, a feeling as deep and reassuring as the earth itself. The connection was no longer a fragile thread, but a thriving, unbreakable root system, drawing strength from every story told and every dream dreamed. A quiet ache bloomed in her chest, a bittersweet longing for the dizzying wonders and heart-pounding dangers of her youth. But that single, wistful note was quickly enveloped by a symphony of contentment. Her adventures were not ending, they were transforming into a legacy that would outlive her by centuries. From a small pouch at her belt, she drew out a few short, shimmering threads, remnants from her first clumsy attempts at the weaver's loom. She carefully braided them together with a single lock of her own silver-streaked hair, weaving her personal history into the realm's enduring magic. Tying this small, humble token to a low-hanging tendril of ivy, she felt the finality of the gesture, not as an end, but as a promise. Her bond with the First Storytellers was eternal, a part of the story itself now. The immense task of nurturing this cycle no longer rested on her shoulders alone. Its ongoing health was a shared responsibility, a quiet duty passed to every teacher who encouraged a child's imagination, every elder who shared a memory, every artist who dared to see the world anew. The stakes were now beautifully distributed, a garden tended by countless hands. As she turned to walk the familiar path home, the sound of young, earnest voices echoed from a sun-dappled clearing just off the trail. She paused, listening to the children weaving a fantastical tale about a friendly rock giant who collected lost mittens. Their laughter was not just a sound, it was a fuel, and their story was a new, bright leaf unfurling on the ancient ivy. Elara smiled, her heart full and certain. The realm was not just safe, it was alive, and its future was being written in that very moment. The towering void of the Forgetters advanced, a wall of absolute silence that consumed the very light of the loom. Elara stood her ground, her hands flying across the shimmering threads as she wove and spoke in the same breath. She pulled a golden strand from an epic of courage, her voice recounting a hero's stand against a storm, then a silver thread from a quiet fable of compassion, her words painting a simple act of kindness that mended a broken friendship. She did not choose one over the other. She wove them together, celebrating the epic and the intimate as equally vital threads in the grand tapestry. She drew on every lesson, from Hemlock's patience to the Whispering Wood's demand for respect, her narration a shield against the chilling numbness that sought to erase her. But the void was relentless. As she reached for the final thread, the one meant to bind the entire narrative, a cold fog descended in her mind. The memory of her mother's laughter, the warmth of her first day in the archives, the steadfast belief that had carried her this far. These cherished moments began to soften and blur at the edges. The Forgetters were not just attacking the loom, they were unweaving her own story, threatening to leave her an empty vessel in a silent world. In that final, desperate moment, she understood the last, terrible requirement. The story of hope could not be found or gathered. It had to be created from a willing sacrifice. Closing her eyes, she reached into the fabric of her own joy, drawing forth her brightest memories not as recollections, but as their living essence. The pure, sharp delight of her first discovery, the warmth of shared laughter with a friend, the unshakable belief in magic that had defined her life. From this substance, she spun a single, luminous thread, fragile and pulsing with a vulnerable, personal light. Weaving it into the tapestry felt like giving away a piece of her soul, an ache of permanent loss that hollowed a part of her heart. But as the hope thread settled into its designated space, the effect was instantaneous and sublime. The completed story of stories erupted in a silent symphony of light and sound, a chord of pure narrative perfection. The colossal entity of forgetters did not scream or retreat. It simply dissolved, its static silence replaced by the clear, bright hum of 1,000 stories breathing in unison. The blinding light washed over the spire, and in its radiant aftermath, Elara was no longer the curious archivist who had entered the woods. She had become a weaver of worlds, her journey defined not by what she had found, but by what she had willingly given. Her sacrifice, a piece of her own joy, became the final, essential thread that secured the realm's survival, ensuring its stories would glow for ages to come. The warmth of the spiced tea in her hands was a small, steady comfort. Elara sat by her cottage window, watching the evening light filter through the luminous leaves of her garden. She was no longer the woman who had first stepped into the whispering woods, driven by a scholar's hunger for proof. That person felt like a character from a story she had once read, a familiar and fondly remembered stranger. Her reflection in the windowpane showed a face lined not with worry, but with the gentle contours of a life spent listening. She was a guardian now, a living bridge between the quiet hum of archives and the vibrant song of the realm, and this role had reshaped her from the inside out. While the sacrifice of her brightest memories had left a quiet hollow, a space where the echo of her mother's laughter should have been, that emptiness was now filled with something else, a profound and unshakable sense of purpose. She had traded isolated recollections for a connection to every story ever told, a belonging so vast it quieted any whisper of personal loss. In the town square below, she could see the proof of this transformation. The Festival of Tales was no longer a novel event, but a natural rhythm of community life, as essential as the harvest. Children who had once only listened to the whispering bush now taught their own invented tales to wide-eyed newcomers. Elders and digital artists collaborated on tapestries that blended ancient symbols with flowing light code. The realm, in turn, reflected this flourishing. Through the archway, she could feel its vitality, a steady, strengthening pulse, fed by this endless, creative exchange. Imagination was no longer a fleeting escape, but the very thread stitching their history to their future. Looking out at the starlit sky, Elara felt a deep, resonant hope. The realm of the First Storytellers was no longer a secret to be protected, but a truth to be lived. It would endure not because of any single guardian, but because the human heart would always need to weave its experiences into narrative, to find the magic in the mundane and the myth in the memory. As long as one person shared a story, the door between the worlds would remain open, and the great cosmic tale would continue forever.